We're living in a time where the cost of living is rising rapidly. Inflation, interest rates, housing costs, food costs. It's all rapidly outpacing wage increases. I'm here with Suman Roy, who's the founder of Feed Scarborough, and we're going to talk about food security and access. This is going to be a somber conversation and a very important one. Hi, Suman.
Hi, Lee.
I'm really excited to talk to you, and really because you've been on the front lines and you've been doing so much work helping people, feeding people, making sure that they can live to see another day, literally. So I want, before we jump into that, you have a history, a really robust history that has led you here. Would you please share a little bit about that journey?
Absolutely. Thanks, Lee, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here today to talk about something that's really near and dear to my heart. So just about me, very briefly, right now I am working in the community of Scarborough, working as we started an organization called Feed Scarborough in the very early days of the pandemic, when most of the food access programs were shutting down. And so was our only food bank in our community in Southwest Scarborough. And it was a handful of neighbors who got together and said, let's do something to help the community. That's where it started from. We never thought we are going to be here 3 years later with Feed Scarborough the way it is and talk about it. I, with many other people, would have thought 2 weeks, the curve is flattened of the pandemic and we'll be back to normal. Yes, 3 years later, that's not the case.
Yeah.
So we are supporting the community. Prior to that, my major career has been in culinary. Yeah. I have traveled the world in doing a lot of really cool stuff in the food area. I used to be the national corporate chef for Campbell Soup, developing recipes. A lot of recipes you see, it's I worked hard on them. I also was the national corporate chef for a company called Sodexo. We used to do contract food service from coast to coast to coast. So I've done a lot of, I was very privileged, I would say, to be able to travel the country in every corner and really working in the culinary scene. So, but it all started from a very humble beginning. I came to this country with literally $42 in my pocket and 2 suitcases full of clothes. I was like many immigrants today I did the same. Literally sleeping on the side of the street and figuring out how I can set my footing in this vast and wonderful country. So that's been there in the beginning, and that kept on in me. Whenever I do something, I do not forget my roots. Yeah. And I've come from that, and I don't want that world for the new Canadians coming into this country, because we know that Canada wouldn't exist without immigrants. We are all immigrants here, and the immigrant folks needs to be taken care of when they come.
Absolutely. I mean, it was interesting. You're also an author.
Yes.
Right? Of a chef, of Canadian food. And we were having this conversation before we were on camera about, so is it diverse enough?
It is really interesting. My book, From Pemmican to Poutine, A Journey Through Canada's Culinary History. So it doesn't only have recipes, but it talks about the history of food in Canada and what is Canadian cuisine. Most people do not understand or know about that. And it's when I did that, and this was around 10 years ago, and when I was doing all my shows and trips around the world, talking about it, it was really interesting to see what people really thought about Canadian food. It was not till the Olympics in Vancouver is when people really tried to know that, Canada does have a cuisine.
Yeah.
It's not just same as American cuisine, and there is a difference. It's a very strong difference. So it was really a cool experience talking about that journey.
I think it's wonderful. For me, I lived in Washington, D.C. in the States for some time. And I remember people coming up to me who were like from Texas. Oh, what's the national cuisine of Canada? What are you known for? And they probably think because Canada comes from England, that would be a lot of like shepherd's pie and all this stuff. And they would name all these things. Me being a first generation Chinese Canadian with parents who came from India, I was like, that's not what we eat. Like we would eat a lot of like tandoor chicken, roti. Like it wasn't even regular momos. Like, absolutely. Yeah. And so I felt the notion of what Canadian culinary cuisine is much more diverse than what people realize.
It is. And one thing I always say in a very one line, if somebody asks me what is Canadian cuisine, I said the biggest difference with Canadian cuisine and other cuisines like Indian and Thai is Indian and Thai kind of cuisine is very flavor based. And Canadian cuisine is ingredient based. Mm. It is what ingredients are found here that is kind of form the cuisine. It's the basis.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the immigrants who came in, they brought their own flavors to add on to that ingredient based cuisine.
Yeah.
So that is just in short, but I have heard people asking me, you are not talking about the raccoon meat you guys eat. And then I say, you want to see a picture of the igloo where I live in Toronto? I can probably show you that. But so it's really interesting what people think about food in Canada.
So, I mean, with your journey and your experience of being a chef and on such a high level from coast to coast, it's brought you now to putting food on people's tables. Let's jump into it, because it's like, one of the things, I'm in housing. I am seeing the disparity that is happening with international students who are coming. They're on limited funds, and yet landlords, there's a bachelor condo that might be 400 square feet is going for $2,300 to $2,400. And I have 4 people who are like, if we put together what we're allocated, $700 for each person, we can live in that. And I was like, no one will rent to you.
Yeah.
You got to look at a basement, and you have to be careful that you don't get scammed because you're abroad and you're desperate. The other day I read a story about international students finding a young international student under a bridge, sleeping. So, and they're like, where are you? They couldn't afford anything.
So I think international students is a big part, but there is also another part is newcomers. They both comes kind of hand in hand. The reason I say that, because Canada has rules, and the rules are meant that if they are followed right, then everything's going to work. But the reality is rules have loopholes. And I know that, because I'm an immigrant myself. Yeah. If growing up in India, coming 21 years ago now, coming at that time, if I had to have $10,000 in my bank account, that is not possible in a place like India unless you're born into rich.
Yeah.
So people do what it takes to survive. And I know many immigrants today, international students, though they have to show X amount of dollars in their bank account to get here, they barely take loans to put it in the bank to show the government. That's not their money to spend. And even for international students, the tuition fees and all are so high, they're barely making the tuition fees. They're coming for greener pastures.
Yeah.
So they don't have the money that they can spend on living because they're barely making the tuition.
Yeah.
So that's a huge. And Canadian colleges, Canadian universities, Canadian education system, and we rely on those international students. Absolutely. We rely on those dollars to come into this country. And they bring a huge economic upturn in places where there is campuses. But we often leave them high and dry. We do not have policies that support when the students come into the country.
No.
A great example is Canada Summer Jobs.
Yeah.
It's a Canadian Summer Jobs is a government program for the summer, giving employment to the students. Mm-hmm. Yes, it's minimum wage, but at least it's an employment. However, international students are not allowed. They have to be a Canadian resident, PR, or Canadian citizen or refugee claimant to be able to do that. While as employers, we have really hard time finding students to fill up my Canada Summer Jobs position, but I cannot take an international student. Makes no sense to me. And it's not only just the money piece.
Yeah.
It is also we are getting them into this country to give them education and experience, but we're leaving them out of the experiential learning.
Yeah.
If we don't give them Canada Summer Jobs.
Absolutely. I mean, you hit on a point. One of the things we know, we have a mandate to bring over 485,000 every single year. And it seems like a lot of numbers, very high, like, oh, all these people coming. Most of that allocation is filled by international students who are already here. And if they are not in a situation where they can work, and we know many of I used to teach at George Brown as a professor, and I would deal with so many students who were like willing to do whatever it takes to survive. Mm-hmm. I would teach an 8 a.m. class, and I'd have a student who would literally be nodding off because they had just come from doing a nighttime security job to help pay the bills.
Yeah.
So
I can see that. It's very shocking and surprising. And when you connected back to food security, I used to be the executive director of an organization called Meal Exchange. So we used to be a food security organization for post-secondary campuses from coast to coast to coast. We used to work on 73 campuses across the country. And in our last survey report a couple of years ago, we found that close to 60% of the students consider themselves as food insecure. What that means is at least one day a week, they go without food.
Yeah.
At least one day a week.
That breaks my heart. I remember I was trying to flag when I worked at George Brown. I said, we need to have more microwaves that work. People cannot afford to buy a meal every day. They're like, oh, yeah, we offer all these good, healthy foods, but people are going for the Tim Hortons donut or pizza. And I'm like, it's not because that's what they want, or patties. It's a $2 patty versus a $12 bowl.
Yeah.
Right? So
exactly.
Food security and access to food is an issue. And for me, I see this from a housing perspective, and really they're tied together.
Very closely.
And so we're going to get like policy wonky on this, right? So, maybe we could talk about your client demographics.
Yeah. So let me tell you a very quick story.
Please.
In Birchcliff, which is southwest corner of Scarborough, a 1-bedroom apartment, basement. If a person is on minimum wage, after paying rent and utilities, a person has $1.81 left per day. And this is real time. This is on ads that we have seen of 1-bedroom apartment rent being asked for. So with $1.81, are they going to pay for transit to get to work, to make that minimum wage? Mm. Are they going to eat? Are they going to buy clothes? What are they going to do? The transit costs over $6 a day. So people are in hole just with going into work to make the money. They're literally paying from their pocket to go into work or wherever their pocket is. So housing and food is hugely connected. And the reason I say that, because food, we know in Canada, food insecurity is not a food problem. 58% of food goes into landfill every year, while 1 in 4 Canadians go to bed hungry. Yeah. So that's a big problem. The access is the key issue. The people food is one place where they can negotiate within themselves. They can't negotiate housing. They need a roof above their head. Yeah. They need somewhere to go and sleep, stay warm or stay dry. Yeah. So that is non-negotiable. Right now, when we recently did a survey, and in that survey, we have realized that close to 40% of the people's wages are going just on rent nowadays, on an average. 38% of our food bank clients have at least one full-time job. 38%.
It's not a lot.
It is. If they are going into work every day, but they still can't afford food, they have to come to a food bank, we as a society have failed.
Absolutely.
And in Canada, 50 years ago, we talked about food as a human right, and we signed off as food as a human right. And still 1 in 4 Canadians goes to bed hungry. 1 in 5 children do not have adequate food. 1 in 3 food bank clients today across the country is a child. Those numbers speak miles, and we have failed Canadians, new Canadians, and all of us if that is the problem.
Yeah.
I'll give you another quick story, and I'm probably going to tear up because this always makes me, it doesn't matter how many times I tell the story, it hurts. In 2020, beginning of pandemic, I'm sure you remember that everything went into online, the schools went into online. So my kid was in kindergarten, and I really wanted to see what happens in an online kindergarten class. It made no sense to me. So one day I sat with my kid to see exactly what's happening. It was a 1-hour class, and it was amazing. The kids were all fun. The teacher was great. They were having a great time. So the class came to an end, and the teacher was asking everybody, so what is the plan for the rest of the day? And many kids, I'm going to go to the backyard and play. I'm going to go up to the park and just play. And I'm going to spend time with my mom and dad. And that was kind of what was happening. This one kid, I know who that is because it's in a school. We know the community, lives 8 houses from me. Said, today is the best day in my life. So, of course, with a kid of that age, everything is about their life. So the teacher asked, what are you doing? Why is it your best day? My parents can go to a food bank and we'll finally get some food at home. I'm hungry. So if a 5-year-old is calling a best day of their life because their parents can go to a food bank, again, we have failed as a society.
Yeah.
Last week, I was in one of our food banks and I see this girl standing in line and she looked really young. So it was the middle of the day. So I said, hey, are you here for the food bank? And she said, yes. I said, not last week, actually last month. So I said, you are not in school? She said, no, I had to miss school today. I said, why did you miss school? Oh, my parents are both working. Nobody was here to come to the food bank, so I had to come pick up the food. So a grade 9 student was missing school to come to a food bank because both their parents were working. So they have 2-income household, but they can't afford food. They had to make their kid miss the school to come to a food bank. These are real life stories that should make everybody wonder, what are we doing?
Absolutely. I mean, even just before you were telling me about the police officer who came.
Yes. And that is another heartbreaking story. You mind if I say that?
Please.
Yeah. It's so the other day, a police officer, it was a Saturday, came over to our food bank and says, hey, Suman, can we get some food? We need to give it to a family. And generally, it's not a request you get every day. So we packed a hamper and gave it. But I said, I want to hear the story when you come back because I want to know who this food is going to and what's happening. So they said, yeah, we'll be right back. So they came back, and I said, okay, the story. And the story was they got a phone call on a 911 line from a building saying a particular apartment was giving out really bad smell. So the neighbors called for a wellness check. So these officers went for a wellness check. It was a single mother with 5 children. And certainly there was an issue in the house that there was stinking. The house was not clean. And so the officers were talking to the mom, and they realized that there might be other medical issues that the mom was going through. And that was the reason for all of this. But when they opened the fridge and the cabinets in the kitchen, there was not a speck of food in that house. A single mother with 5 children from African American origin. So the police officers came back, took food, went in there. And the officer said, as we were leaving, the youngest one came to us, pulled my uniform and said, when are you going to be back? Because that was a light that the kid could see at the end of the tunnel to hunger. And that is the community. We are in Canada. We are supposed to be G7 where we actually we have wealth enough. And still that is how we are suffering.
Yeah.
And of course, it needs to be a political issue, a political policy so that needs to go. And it's not one policy solution.
No.
There needs to be multiple policies that actually help Canadians and get out of where we are today.
Yeah. No, and I think these stories we hear them as stories, right? And it's important to hear them, but it's someone's life. It's a child's life. I mean, we were talking in the context of school programs and the school food programs and how important that is, because even as a lifeline during COVID, having kids come to school, and I had heard so many stories about children being saved by going to school. Mm-hmm. That was clean, that had food, that had older adults who could look after them, that they might not have at their home. We don't know what happened in that 3 years. And I do believe there are a lot of children who have been impacted. Not just children, everybody has been impacted in some way, shape, or form. And we haven't even started to scratch the surface of that. We see, and it may not just be COVID, right? But it's a time where people were isolated, and isolation does things.
Totally.
Right? So in terms of where we're going with this, in terms of knowing that there's a dire need, we're a G7 country that should be wealthy enough to take care of our own people. Where do we start? How do we get people off? Like, we should not be having food banks.
So I think one thing, just going back to what you just said about school food, the story I was talking about, the single mom of 5 kids, it is a very knowledgeable guesstimate that these 5 kids rely on food from school 5 days a week. That's why on Saturday, there was no food at home, because generally during the school week, it's fine, they're getting fed. We are also the only G7 country who do not have a school food policy. The only G7.
Really?
Yes. And if we cannot prioritize our generation, future generation, our kids, we know we are in schools. The kids go to schools. Post-secondary students goes to universities and colleges. The main goal is one, education. They're going to study. But you cannot study in a hungry stomach. You cannot focus.
Yeah.
But why does, and I'm going a little back and forth into post-secondary institutions, food being such an important element to studying and education, then why is food not prioritized on campuses? Why is food always a part of ancillary services and never one of the core programs? Sports is.
Yeah.
So sports is prioritized, which should be. I'm not saying that shouldn't be. But why is food not? Why is food in every campus across the country left in a space where it is zero profit, zero loss? Why isn't the people not really fed and taken care of? There are countries like Finland, like France, like China, who really have a school food policy on post-secondary where all students are fed. Whether it's highly subsidized or free, it changes from place to place, but nothing in Canada, in a country like Canada. Mm. So there are a lot of issues that needs food. Food security is a very complex topic.
Absolutely.
And there is not one solution. But the immediate need that we are seeing, especially in places like Toronto, like Scarborough, is the need for tackling poverty reduction for new Canadians. And that is a big, and when I say new Canadians, it's pretty broad. It's international students, it's new immigrants, refugees, it's all of them clubbed into one.
Yeah.
And that, I think, something that as I always say, our community is as strong as our weakest member.
Agreed.
And
totally.
If we leave them high and dry, we are not going to be in a community where we want to live.
Yeah.
And that we are getting to that stage.
Yeah.
We are getting to that stage where you talked about a student living under a bridge. You go to downtown, we have been seeing the refugees are on the side of the street.
Yeah.
Refugees are going into churches and living in churches, just tying themselves up till they've figured things out. Like, this is not the Canada that we want to see.
No, it absolutely isn't. And so that, in talking about our current state of affairs, it's a complex situation. There isn't going to be a magic, piece to it. Where do we start, right? Policymakers.
Yes. So we know that we do not have adequate amount of housing. That is no secret to anybody. Yeah. Everybody knows that. But there's a lot of, you want to ask yourself why. And what is preventing us from building these housing?
Yeah.
When we are bringing those people in, if you don't bring, it's a different story. Then we get into the economic problem of this country not running if you don't bring in people.
Yeah.
But why are housing not built? And it's all three levels of government. It's not one or the other. Starting from municipal, the municipal government can say as much and push it onto the feds or the province. But the reality is, why is the city taking so much time to approve projects? Like, where is the bottleneck happening?
Yeah.
I know in our community, in a place where we live, where our warehouse is, that is slated to be a 7,500 unit development. Literally, they're building a small city within the space. And I've seen the plans. It's not a bad development. There's lots of things happening in there. We need the housing. But that project is being delayed for whatever reasons. Now, I was talking to that developer the other day, and he said, every month my project is delayed, I'm losing a little over $1 million on interest, on wages, or whatever that is. So it's already delayed 2 years. He said, over $24 million we are down. Guess who's paying that money? Not the developer. The price of the apartment is going to go up when they sell it. So we are creating a high cost of housing. Yeah. Like, there are ways, I believe, to tackle this. Yes, that doesn't mean that our city goes and approves any development, whatever they feel like. That doesn't mean that at all. Yeah. But it means that they need to work diligently into finding solutions very quick to make sure these housings are built. People have a place to live. The whole concept about affordable housing. In Toronto, affordable housing is not affordable, period. There is no question about it. 20% below market rate is not affordable because market rate is so high. Yeah. It is. So we need to really understand affordability. In a place like Scarborough, with many developments and many zoning changes, we are losing tons of employment land, which was slated for employment or businesses. Now, that is driving more precarious employment in our communities. And precarious employment with minimum wage doesn't cut it.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely. And there's so many issues. I mean, even when we talk about the development being delayed, the other piece is transportation. And we look at, Metrolinx, Eglinton line, which has been delayed. What are we in 10 years now?
Yeah. And it's not going to be anytime soon either.
I don't even see it. And you see these beautiful, along the Eglinton stretch going out to Scarborough. Oh, they have to undo some work and redo it. And there's something, I don't know what it is. We have new leadership. I think that, the population, the demographics have voted in someone where they want to see change. I don't know what will happen. But I think all the levels of government have to work together because it's not one tier alone. It has to be scaffolded because this is such a complex issue. Like we started with food security and access, but it's tied in to housing, transportation, employment, all of that stuff. So
it is, and honestly, without being partisan at all in this conversation, I do not personally see all three levels working together. I see major divides between all three levels. Yeah. And I think that is where we are suffering quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I think that bridge needs to be built. I don't know which level will take the leadership to build that bridge, but one of the levels need to build that bridge.
Yeah.
They are everybody on their ego trips on their own. Yeah. They say that when two elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers. And that's exactly where we are right now. Yeah. That the people are suffering because we are all busy pointing fingers that who's going to give the money and what's going to happen. And that's not the conversation we should be in. Yeah. We should have passed that stage because it's here now.
So that could take a long time. And I'm hopeful that we have smart people. We have elected good people from different parties and different levels. But more immediately, especially for the regular people who watch this, what can people do on an individual level, on a, personal level?
So there's the easiest solution, if I have to tell you, is unfortunately the weight of fixing some of these immediate Band-Aid solutions are on the shoulders of charities. whether we like it or not. So yes, if anybody watching this, if you want to help today to solve this problem, not solve, but help this problem today, work with your charity, local charity where you are, go out, volunteer, spend some time. And so I always say, of course, every charity needs money and donate and all that jazz. But I've put a lot of weight on volunteering, because what volunteering does is, of course, helps the charity. But what it does is teaches and shows the people what the problem is firsthand. Because I strongly believe if everybody knows the real problem and ask those questions at the door when your political leaders are knocking at your door, and tell them and make them understand that we are all looking at these problems and I need you to solve.
Yeah.
There will be a political will to solve.
Yeah.
We had done, and this is years ago, a research in the federal level before an election. And at that time, the prime minister, I used to be in the prime minister's ear, regularly saying, we need food security resources. And this is years ago. And he looked at me one day and said, and this was way before COVID and all, he said, yeah, but people are not asking for food. So why are you on my case? And I said, no, people are hungry. People need it. And he says, okay, let's do an experiment. I said, okay, what is that? He said, you choose 4 ridings where the food insecurity is maximum across the country and which is run by the governing party. So I said, okay, we did. And he said, let's track 3 months leading up to the election, all the calls and emails we are getting in those ridings. And let's see how many are food related. Believe it or not, it was less than 1%.
Okay.
However, the food insecurity in those communities is so high. People don't really understand whose responsibility that is. And you know how politics works. If people are not asking, it's not happening.
Yeah, the squeaky wheel is what gets the oil.
Exactly. So the prime minister at that time said, see, that's exactly what I said. People are not asking for it. We have better things people are asking for, and that's what we are focusing on.
And it's a cycle. It's a cycle because the people who need these items the most are so busy working low-wage jobs where they don't have a car. So then they have to rely on taking public transportation, where if I had a car, it might take me half an hour or 20 minutes. But if I have to take public transportation, it'll take an hour and a half, right?
Exactly.
Connections. And so an hour and a half multiplied by two is 3 hours. You work an 8-hour shift. You have to buffer in being late maybe, or else you get docked your fee.
Yeah.
So you buffer in extra time to get there. On top of who's dropping off the kids, and where do you do your groceries, or where do you go to the food bank?
And what you're talking about is somebody who's doing one job. Many of the people are doing 2
Absolutely.
or 3 because they just can't make the ends meet with one job.
Yeah.
So when do they have time to even engage in politics or even go out and vote?
No, and that's the thing that I have experienced where, people are working those months. My mom, when she came to Canada, she came with $8, right? And she would have to take the TTC and pack her food and eat it on the subway, going from one job to another job. And she would be out of the door before I woke up, and she would be in after I'd gone to bed. So it is not much has changed.
Now, I'll tell you, when I came here in my very early days, I was doing 2 jobs, 2 full-time jobs. And I realized it was cheaper for me. And that time we had all these internet kiosks where you just hire time by the hour and just go and work on internet. Instead of renting, it was cheaper for me for just 3 or 4 hours I had every night before my other shift to go into one of those places, pull the curtain and fall asleep. And that is Canadian reality right now. And this was 20 years ago. It hasn't been any better. It's gotten worse.
And people don't hear it. They don't hear it. The politicians aren't hearing about it because people don't have time to complain.
Exactly. And that is a huge challenge. And now we talk about voter turnout in Toronto and in Canada being so low because most people do not have the time.
Yeah.
And then they feel that, I'm just a poor person here. I'm trying to make ends meet. Nobody's listening to me. That's big people. And that is the mentality with all our immigrants coming in. They come from different parts of the world where politicians are seen in a very different way than we see in Canada.
Yeah.
And they just don't understand that they are approachable. Let's go and talk to them. When they come to your door for your vote, tell them what you have to feel. Tell them your story. And that is going to make a difference.
Yeah.
And I don't think people really understand that. So what can be done immediately? I think to go out and support and learn and have those conversations with your political leaders, that's simple.
So
But,
your counselor, your local municipal counselor, your local MPP, and your federal MP.
Absolutely.
So and many people don't even know what a riding is.
And also many people doesn't know what falls under whose umbrella.
Yeah.
So that is a huge challenge. Keeping in mind, we have such a huge immigrant population. They haven't learned the civics of Canada.
Yes.
They haven't learned how the Canadian political system works. I know in the citizenship, you learn something, but it's not enough to actually for people to know and understand.
Yeah.
I have heard people going to a federal or a municipal leader and talk about how terrible the school problems are. Yeah, you need to go to the province. So those understanding needs to happen. But it also, I'll tell you another very quick story. One of the prime ministers and was there for 10 years as a prime minister. And I've met the prime minister many times. And we were talking about school food and support for school food. And every time we talked about school food, he just used to look at me and stop me in the first sentence and say, school is not my problem. Go to your province. However, our current prime minister showed and demonstrated that though school is under provincial, federal has a way to help. Yeah, we are not there yet, but he started the ball rolling. So there are things that people can do if there is enough squeaky wheels.
Yeah.
We just talked about MP Julie Debreson, who's been a complete advocate to have the current Liberal government work on school food policies, on how we can actually slowly move the needle. And you can do it because that MP, Julie Debreson, has heard multiple times from many people across the country the need for kids to get proper food at school. Mm-hmm. And unless and until the MPs and MPPs and your councillors, your mayor are listening and hearing these problems, they don't think they exist.
Yeah, that's true. So you have to vocalize.
You have to vocalize. So that's kind of one of the key things. I think many of our government, all three levels, have really smart people in them to come up with policies. And we just released a report from Feed Scarborough identifying a couple of very important aspects that's adding to food insecurity, like immigration, housing, employment. And we are talking about that with policy suggestions that what can be done. Something like very basic. Our immigration system has point system. A lot of point is given for education and experience before they come.
Yeah.
But once they come, those experience doesn't matter because every employer is looking for Canadian experience.
Yes.
And when I came, this was my patent story to say that, sorry, they were not giving out Canadian experience in India. I tried. Nobody gave me experience. They gave me Indian experience. So what do you expect me to do?
Yeah.
If nobody wants to give me a job because I don't have Canadian experience, how would I get that experience?
Yeah.
So some basic things that the government can do very quickly in recognizing some of the education and experience from back home as a country is super helpful. Incentivize employers to show diversity data and see how they can employ diverse people.
Yeah.
We have a Canadian job bank. Can we not have a similar job bank for new immigrants for the employers to post where they would welcome new immigrants to come in? Can they not do something like that? So there are very small things that's going to actually add up. And I know these are not major policy statements, but these are small policies that can be adopted very quickly to make a difference today.
Yeah. And that's certainly finding the solutions. It's do something instead of nothing to activate and keep the momentum going, and to slowly, it takes time, right? Like
Absolutely.
Building a mountain is one rock at a time.
Exactly.
I think one of the things that you have here as your favorite quote, it costs $30,000 a month to keep someone in hospital, $10,000 per month in jail, $7,000 per month in shelter, and only $3,000 in supportive housing. Denying housing as a human right is both morally repugnant and much more expensive.
Exactly. And I think that is something that always stays close to my heart, because this is 100% true in today's environment in Canada. And it boggles my mind that why is this not a common sense?
Yeah.
Connecting this to food security.
Yeah.
Like, why is public health and food prescription not a priority? Why is healthcare a priority? Healthcare is reactive. Food care is proactive. Why are we making people sick and then try to take care of them?
Mm.
And for me, it's a common sense. For many, it's, if I ask my 7-year-old today, she will say it's a common sense.
Yeah.
But we do not see them in government policies.
Yeah.
We see, and this is from provincial government as well, we see drastic cut in public health budgets. And public health is proactive. Because public health, you can't see a sick person because they're preventing people from getting sick.
Yeah.
But they're increasing healthcare budget, but not public health budget. So you wonder where the priority lies. Like, we want a healthy community.
Yeah.
We don't want them to be sick and then try to make them healthy.
Yeah.
That makes no sense.
Care.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we are lacking. We are lacking. I'm on the board of health for the city of Toronto, and we are tremendously worried on our budget for next year. That we are very worried that the province has said they're going to cut. Now, are they really going to go through or not? We don't know. We know in 2021 they cut and then they reversed back with all the everybody crying about it. And we just don't know what they're going to do now. It makes us worried because what it's going to do is cancel out many programs that actually prevents people from getting sick.
Right.
Many programs, including the student nutrition in schools, that actually feed the kids so they can be healthy and they're not being sick and then going to the doctor.
Yeah.
So I think there is a lot of things that, once again, can be done, and a proactive approach needs to be there.
Absolutely. I really appreciate, the lens that you bring to this, having gone from coast to coast, having been on the front lines, and also having a policy background to say, if we're going to do change, here's what we can do immediately. Make a donation, volunteer at a local food bank, at a local charity, do what is within your ability. Next, contact your local councillor, contact your local member of provincial parliament, your local member of parliament, and tell them what the issue is so that it can be recorded and acknowledged, right? And because it's really the complexity of who has time, who has the time to deal with those things. Yeah.
And most of the time, unfortunately or fortunately, whatever you say, the time availability is with people with privilege.
Yeah.
And if you, being somebody with privilege, cannot really say these stories and narrate these stories, the stories will never get narrated. And that is why I always call out for volunteering, because now you're not listening from a person like me. You are seeing it firsthand. Yeah. You are seeing the face and hearing the stories right from the horse's mouth on what's happening around our city, around our country.
Yeah, so we get people who have the time to come, volunteer, experience it firsthand.
Exactly.
So before we wrap up, what are some roles, like when people go volunteer, what does that look like?
So every charity is different. So from a Feed Scarborough's perspective, it can be as low as once a week for a few hours to as much time as you have. We always welcome. Currently, we have over 350 active volunteers every week because our programs have grown so much over the last 3 years. So it can be anything that you like.
Yeah.
We have people who loves to cook and comes to our kitchen and cooks once a week, because we serve over 2,000 people with hot food every week. So people who love to cook. There are people who love to just work out and they come and spend a couple of hours in our warehouse. instead of going to the gym that day, they're
Physically
lifting boxes.
stuff?
Exactly. So we have
get your workout
exactly, and it's free. You don't have to pay for your gym. Come on over. But also there is people who like to, especially we see quite a few seniors who like to be in our food banks and actually registering our clients,
Right.
or talking to them and showing them where things are and making sure they're doing the right thing and getting the right food, what they need, what their family needs. So there's a lot of things. We have different events. We have markets where we need volunteers to actually talk about the problems and have those communication with people coming to a big event, for example, because we need everybody to understand the problems we are facing. It's not just for the people who are suffering.
Yeah, it's about amplifying
Absolutely.
and bringing awareness.
You got the word right.
Absolutely. No, listen, I want to thank you so much for joining me today, because the story that you tell is a story of so many people that we do not see or hear from, because they're hardworking Canadians.
Exactly.
Right? And every new Canada is a country built on immigrants, and every single newcomer is a Canadian who is suffering silently.
Yes.
Thank you for
Exactly.
your work.
It's a pleasure, and I'm privileged to be able to do it. Thank you for having me here, Lee.
It's my pleasure.
Thanks.
Is he awesome? He's
Yeah.
awesome, right?
Okay.
He's inspiring.